Okay, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to call the committee to order. This is the Anchorage Assembly Legislative Committee. Today is Wednesday, January 22nd, 2025. We're noticed from 1:10 to 2:10 p.m. here in City Hall. First, we'll go through and do introductions, then we'll get into our agenda. So I'll go around the room, starting with Mr. Littlefield.
Mark Littlefield.
Karen Bronga.
Scott Myers.
Zach Johnson.
Anna Brawley. And we also have Mr. Constant walking up, and I see Felix Rivera's bag, so I imagine he'll be back. Anyone on the phone? Okay, no other members on the phone. We're also joined by a couple members of the administration, Assembly Council, Clerk's Office, and let's get into it. So we will be moving through our agenda. I'll note that this is the first meeting of this committee this year. As been previously stated, the two purposes of this committee is to really help develop the legislative program, run that through the process, which we did back in the fall and approved that in December. And then we are meeting monthly during legislative session to keep up with what's happening down in Juneau, to some extent keeping up with what's in DC and where we need to be engaged. So I will just note that on the agenda, we have our unfinished business, which is our kind of standing items, so federal and state, and then space for anybody who wants to bring up a district priority or something on your mind as a member. So I'll just briefly see if we have any of those, and otherwise we'll move on to the rest of our agenda. Okay, I know we're just starting out, so I just wanted to make space for that. But just to note, if there are items in the future that you want to bring up, we can either put them on the agenda or, again, there's space to talk about them there. So let's move on to our new business. We have a couple of updates on upcoming travel / engagement with the legislature. They obviously gavelled in yesterday. There's a number of pre-file bills that we're going to be briefly looking at, not getting deeply into, but just kind of understanding where we're at. And then also if we want to have a discussion about our budget priorities as we prepare to go down to Juneau and think about our legislative program. So first we'll go into new business. So I'll briefly mention this and I'll kick it over to Mr. Clauda to add any additional detail. Several of us are going down to Juneau next Monday, or basically next week, about Monday through Wednesday or Thursday, depending on the person's itinerary. We will be participating in a couple committee hearings. We're having a number of meetings with the legislative leadership in both houses. We'll be meeting with our Anchorage delegation. And again, really just making sure that we are building and maintaining those relationships down in Juneau and talking about what our priorities are. So I will just turn it to Mr. Clauda if you'd like to add any additional information. And then I'll just note that Mr. Rivera joined us in the room. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Nolan Clauda with the Mayor's Office. The trip to Juneau next week will be from the administration side. It's going to be the mayor, municipal manager, chief administrative officer, chief of staff, and Graham Downey, the special assistant to the mayor on housing and transportation. And so I will not be joining, despite doing a lot of the coordination to help set it all up. But I think that we have a lot of materials prepared for it and some good discussion about priorities. And we will be very happy to have the opportunity to tell our story in the legislature.
Yeah, and then I'll just add on the assembly side, I know we've got myself and Mr. Johnson going down, as well as Mr. Constant. And I think that's just the three of us for now. But yeah, really hoping to support. And then the assembly is hosting our annual dinner with the Anchorage delegation on Tuesday night. So we've invited folks to that. That will be before the governor's State of the State address, which was scheduled that same evening. So we made sure to make some space in between those events. And so I think there's not much else to say about that. Just wanted to make folks aware of it. And I don't know if there's any other discussion or questions on that, but I'll make space for that briefly. Okay, not seeing any. So next item is another upcoming legislative visit, and again, open invitation to members to join us. The Alaska Municipal League Conference, or AML, they hold a winter conference down in Juneau to do a legislative fly-in. So it's not just the AML folks, but also local elected officials and others from local government who come in from all over the state and speak to local government priorities. So the conference itself is February 18th through the 20th. I believe we will also be joined by a couple members of the administration at that conference. I see Nolan nodding. And so just to say, if there's anybody who's interested, not only is there, I guess, an exception in the Open Meetings Act that allows for more than 3 members to participate in those types of events, those local government conferences, but also it's a great opportunity to engage in Juneau. So again, February 18th through the 20th, the week of February 17th, really, if anybody wants to join, please just talk to the clerk's office. And I don't think there's any other thing to note on that. So then we can move on to what I hope we spend the bulk of our time on, and that is looking at a brief list of a selection of the pre-file bills that we saw come forward. So I'm going to turn to our document here. And I'll note also, of course, bills get introduced throughout session. There's, kind of soft deadlines for when people are supposed to stop introducing bills, but of course the committees can also introduce bills. So we know this is not the entire universe of things that will come up in Juneau, but it's a good start. So I'll give some introduction to this list and then really just wanted to open this up for questions, flagging things of interest, and really just thinking about where we want to focus our energy in Juneau. So what you're looking at is a list pulled from the longer list of pre-filed bills. There's many out there. They're on the legislative website. This document, the PDF version, has a link to each of those. The legislators' website for the full text of the bill. They're sorted by topic, generally speaking. They have their short title, who's the sponsor, whether it's the House or a Senate, that's the H and the S, and then a very brief description as well as when it was filed. So I'll just give some kind of overall comments and then also turn to Mr. Klauda if there's ones you want to highlight. Again, our goal is not to go through and really parse all these out in detail, but just looking for things that might be of relevance to the municipality. So we've seen several on education. You can see there's a sorry, I'm just going through. I guess I'll also note before we go into the detail, there's the table that shows really ones that we've identified as having some kind of either direct connection to the municipality or possible connection to one of our priorities. And we'll get into that. And then there's also bills that are maybe outside of the scope of what we would potentially engage on, and that's the second table in blue, but also are related to the similar topics. So I'll say elections is one of the big ones. And so again, these are ones that may or may not be things that we see a direct connection to the municipality or ones that we would want to take potential action on, but want people to be aware. So then just generally speaking, what we saw based on the pre-files in general is we saw a lot of bills about education, and I would put them in the categories of education funding, which of course we recently passed a resolution that's been a topic of interest. I'll also note there's a school bond debt reimbursement, a bill related to that, which has to do with the state paying or reimbursing local governments for bond-funded school improvement projects. So that's kind of one category. And then we see a number of other ones in the category of education around curriculum, operations. For example, there's a bill restricting cell phone use in classrooms. So things that are maybe not quite the core of what we do. They're more in the purview of the school board, but wanted to make folks aware of that. Another one, there's a couple on elected officials. Again, that may impact us individually as members. Is it relevant to the municipality? I'm not sure. It looks like we might be joined by another member, so I will. Okay, we are joined by Mr. Gates on the phone, attorney. So we've got elected officials, energy. I think we know energy is going to be a big topic based on everything we've heard. So we see one bill here related to electric co-op rates, which affects us with Chugach. Number of bills on health. Again, behavioral health is one of the priorities that we have identified. It is not a service that the municipality provides, but it is important. A couple on housing, one on Chugach State Park and land management easements there. One proposing hosting a legislative session in Anchorage. So of course, that's not, to my knowledge, something we've taken a position on, but it is our town. So it's noted here. One on local government taxation, also housing. There is another bill that was introduced regarding a port authority and creating a port of South Central Alaska. Something we saw came up last legislature. Multiple ones on public safety that have to do with peace officers that also would regulate potentially local police, which is why they're on this list. And then one on transportation, another one on regulating a refuse or solid waste utility. So that would certainly impact our own solid waste utility. And then a number of bills on workforce, especially related to retirement system. So big topics, probably not a lot of surprises there. And again, noting we have not dug into these bills or again, taken a position on any of them except insofar as they relate to our priorities. And then I'll just briefly mention, then we can open for discussion. Many of the other bills that we put on this list that may or may not intersect with our interest or purview are around elections. Many of those have to do with state elections or campaigns, but there may be impacts on us that require code changes or that otherwise impact local elections. And then, as I noted, a bunch of them on education that are related to things other than funding, but may also be of interest, obviously, because we have a school district in our purview. So all of that to say, number of pre-filed bills. We know the governor has already introduced a few more bills today, and so this is not meant to be the full list, but wanted to start to open discussion. And especially if there's things that we have interest in and want to follow up on or have questions about that we would like to chase down. So with that, I will pause and see if there's others who would like to make comments. Mr. Rivera.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So I don't have a comment on any particular bill, but I was wondering, I am familiar with Juneau, but don't live and breathe Juneau. Is there a possibility in the this chart to maybe bold the name of the legislators that are in the majority? Because I don't know for all of these who's in the majority and who's in the minority. And while there is not always a correlation, there is 100% correlation. There is a strong correlation, some sessions, as to what bills get time and which ones don't. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a great point.
I would
Wisconsin.
note that Kiesel's energy bill isn't just about electric co-op rates. It's specifically about allowing the cost of battery storage to be within the rates, which is interesting for a number of reasons, but in particular, the pump storage hydro concept for the native village, the river restoration is actually a battery, right? So if we were to use the pump to store water in the lake, that's a battery. And so we will want to watch that to develop and make sure it isn't so specific that it only allows the purchase of, lithium ion or whatever the storage capacity is, but that there are kind of other accepted concepts of what battery energy storage would be.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think these are the kind of things that we still need to tease out and also recognizing we are not full-time lobbyists. That is not our main job, but we know that things that happen in Juneau can certainly affect us. So thank you for pointing that one out. I'll also ask Mr. Clauda if you have other general comments you want to make, bills you're tracking, or just any thoughts along those lines.
Sure. I have not, done a deep dive into all the pre-filed bills, but a few that sort of jumped out that grabbed my attention from the perspective kind of our legislative program. One is that Senator Dunbar introduced a bill, I think at SB 14, that's a financing workforce housing. So that's something that would allow for, basically more capital tools to build multifamily housing. That would be a more generous form of financing would be something that we would like to see. I think that's pretty favorable. The SB 47 by Senator Giesel is something that we provided some input on that allows for right-of-way easements in Chugach State Park, something that's relevant to some of the conversations around the CASA concept and other stuff like that. Of course, there's also at least one bill that opens up the property tax exemption conversation, and we're always just a little bit cautious about that discussion. And then of course, it always piques our interest when there's something to do with establishing a new port authority that would take municipal assets under a new ownership structure. I think I'm not sure where that bill will go. Those are a few of my initial kind of reactions.
Yeah, thank you very much. And on the topic of the Port Authority, I'll just note that, as I said, that came up in the last legislature. It was a different sponsor at that time, or I think there was maybe two different bills. So this was maybe one of them, but not the other. I will note that the sponsor of that is in the minority. So to Mr. Verrick's point, but it is a narrow majority in the House. And so I think that's something to note. And that is not something that, at least to my knowledge, the Assembly has taken a firm position on, but I think that's something that we certainly are going to be monitoring closely, have a lot of questions on. I know in the past, multiple mayors have expressed opposition to that idea, certainly without fair compensation. So I anticipate this will be one that we will continue to watch, but we will see if it gets a hearing. I'm just looking at this list otherwise. And I think it is hard. So I guess just to share as well, the general procedure in the legislature is different from the Assembly in that when one of us introduces something on the agenda, it's on the agenda for the full body to talk about at a meeting. And of course, whether we do that depends on what happens after that. With the legislative process, these bills get introduced and they do not go anywhere until they have committee assignments and they have hearings. And so we don't know what the committee assignments are for these bills. That is the kind of thing we will track. And then of course they need to move sequentially through the committee process. I think in theory, you could skip it, but I've never heard of that happening. And so that's really one thing to watch on this, and anything else that you're watching in Juneau is what committee is it in? Did it get a hearing? And then of course it needs to move through that process before it moves even to a floor vote and to the other body to vote on it and potentially pass it or change it. So certainly this is step one, is putting these in the queue for consideration, but we're not anywhere close to these getting passed. And I guess I'll note one other thing, because I don't want to belabor this conversation too much. But we are tracking the election bills, but I will clarify that what we're tracking is specifically either things that directly affect the municipality and our local elections, or are things that Anchorage has done essentially and considers best practice that we advocate for at the state level. And one of those is, I can't remember and Mr. Constant, maybe you can, have we ever actively taken a position on things like removing the witness signature on absentee ballots or issues like that? I know there's issues.
Specifically, I believe we have taken a position on stamps as a thing of value. But I think I would have to do some research to remember exactly what that was. But my recollection back in 2018 or 2019 was there was a push to designate stamps as not a thing of value. So that's the only thing that comes to mind.
Yeah, thank you. And so that's just to note, that is something that would certainly affect our mail-in elections. There's plenty of other things that are related to state elections, primaries, things like that don't directly affect us. But so I just wanted to really underscore, these are on the list, but they deal with a topic that we care about, but they may not be within the purview of what we deal with locally. But we do know things like the voter rolls. I know there's been discussion of what is the length of time before somebody is removed from the voter rolls. That has been an active discussion at the legislature. That's something our clerk's office is tracking because it impacts us as well. So just to note, as we move forward, we know there's, which bill numbers move forward, and then there's which pieces of bills get put into other things. And so that's just one of the items that we'll be tracking. Again, I'll just ask if there's any other specific items on this list as you look through it, or general topics that you want to make sure that we talk about.
So Ms. Burley, just on the
Yeah.
previous question, AR 2022-343 was a resolution of the Anchorage Assembly requesting the state of Alaska amend state statutes to allow persons to offer items of nominal value to encourage persons to vote, such as postage to mail in a ballot. So it's 2022-343 if anyone wants to poke
Wow.
back.
Mr. Bear.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I was looking at it as well, and I would be interested in going back and listening to the record of that debate because that resolution failed. I don't know why, but it failed.
There is a version that appears to have passed on 11/9/2022. So it says, action approved 11/9/2022. I'll look at the item itself, though. Maybe there's something else to be seen there.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that really also,
Oh, it's marked in two different ways. So you're right, it failed. But the actual portal says it passed, Jasmine. So we want to get that clarified. Yeah, but when you go to the item itself, it says failed 11/9. So we need to do some research. So yeah, but in any case, there was at least an effort to do that, and there is a full record there. So, for that clarification, Mr. Brown.
yeah, thank you. And we'll definitely get the documentation cleaned up. But I think also, just a reminder to members too, one common practice that we have had is certainly not attempting to take positions on every bill that goes through. But if there's something that you feel strongly about, that there is a clear nexus with the municipality where you feel it is important for us to take a position on an item or simply recommend in a formal way, changes to it, for example. The option to do that is really a resolution. So in addition to our legislative program, where we kind of talked broadly, there's no bill numbers in there. And we may not want to endorse a bill. We may want to endorse a general concept, like this example of the allowing stamps to be provided. So as you think about the next few months, just consider how you would like to draft a resolution, if you'd like to mention a bill number or not. And then we certainly have examples that have been passed the last couple of years that you could look back at as examples. And so that is a way, in addition to our legislative program, to again, really formally take a position on behalf of the municipality and be able to allow members to speak to it in that way. Because, otherwise, if we go to Juneau and we're talking outside of our legislative program and not on one of those items, then we can certainly speak as individual members and say, I think you should do this, or I think this is important for the district. What you can't say is the municipality has said this or the assembly has said this. So it's an important distinction. Yeah, Ms. Branca?
So with the various teachers and public employee retirement type bills, is there one that, I guess, looking them up individually I can, but as an assembly or a municipal body, is there one that we feel like we align with better? Do you have any idea? I haven't tracked them far enough to.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I know in our legislative program, we've said pretty strongly, we support a defined benefit system, and we don't get in the weeds on what that is. And I know there's a lot of different variations on that. So I personally have not read those bills yet, nor have I really digested the nuances of them. So I don't know. I'll ask Mr. Clauda if there's any initial thoughts. But I think right now our position is a defined benefit. And so the question is really whether these bills are a good or bad implementation of that.
And maybe one more, previously, maybe last year, it was only for public safety. And are all of these inclusive of teachers? And I can dig through myself, but wondering what you know of them, Nolan or Mr. Cloud.
So we haven't done a deep dive into any of the defined benefit pension bills that have been introduced. I think that we, as Madam Chair said, we, we are strongly supportive of, of adding a defined benefit, retirement system for public employees across the board. But I think which vehicle and what specifics go into it is something that we haven't fully sussed out yet. And I think we're kind of going to want to see how this debate moves forward in the Capitol, I think.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll just add too, these are the kind of questions I think that are helpful to raise and just say, what information would you like? Because the resources we have, of course, they are limited, but we do have our lobbyists who have been, they've given presentations to this committee, but that's something that we can ask them to analyze. And we can also contact the sponsors to understand the implications. And of course, watching if and when any of these get a hearing, there's more information at that point as well. So I'll take that as a follow-up item. Oh, go ahead, Ms. Braga.
The other one I peeked at was SB 8 and the LV Gray Jackson with the education for deaf and hearing impaired. I can't picture a school not offering those services, so I'm kind of curious as to where the hole is, and so I'll dig in and see if I can find anything on that.
Okay, Mr. Johnson.
I think to kind of tie into sort of the first question Member Brawley asked is, and I'm asking this as a question, I think the answer is probably, we'll wait and see, but it's like, where do we, or how are we most effective, right? If we're talking about defined benefits, is it just sort of to say like, we want it, we don't necessarily take a stake on exactly what that has to look like, just figure out how to get there? Or does there come a point where we look at a particular piece of legislation, we decided, this seems to have momentum, this seems to best fit with our goals, and let's just kind of become a champion for that? And I kind of asked as a question, if somebody wants to respond to it, Mr. Cloud, I certainly welcome your feedback, but my initial thought would be like, it's probably too early to say. And maybe it's about tracking these things as we see how things sort of go along in Juneau, and then maybe it leads to a particular place and maybe it doesn't. But I think this is a good starting point. And also, just while I'm talking, I just want to briefly thank Ms. Brawley for putting this together. It was a long list of pre-files, and I do not think it was a small task to go through and call that down to the nice little spreadsheets we see here. So thank you for putting in that effort, because this is a nice handy reference for us.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. And I will also say staff had a big help in this as well. Did you want to respond, Mr. Cloud? Go ahead.
Sure, through the chair to Member Johnson. I think on the defined benefit one, or on other bills, where we have a broad priority, and then when it gets time into the specifics, and if there are different versions, which one do we support, or what stance do we take? I think that it's going to be a very, very much an evolving picture. We're going to be tracking these bills closely within the administration, but I think also, with the schedule of meetings of this committee coming up, with February and March, that is also probably, with the blessing of the chairs, that's a great opportunity, I think, for us to have that conversation too, to revisit. It's a good vehicle for that. So, having those conversations and checking in on those topics, I think, could be pretty important.
Yeah, thank you. And I will also add, many of these relate to, and I'll just use the police department or the fire department as an example. There's a few that would impact their operations potentially. And so that's ones where we could also ask for just information. And again, not even necessarily a position, but just what would, if this passed, how would this impact us? I think those are the important questions that we'll need to keep asking. And that can also help us gauge, again, how and where we want to engage on those topics. Okay, any other comments on the pre-files at this point? Ms. Branca.
On the pre-file that Giesel has in SB 47 with the Chugach State Park easements, it'd be, what we have found is the deferred maintenance of the state on trailheads, trails within the state, but especially in Anchorage. It would be nice that they not only set aside easements, but they also commit to further maintenance of their assets in Anchorage area. I think they forget that that's I think Chugach State Park is the largest state park in Alaska, maybe not, but it's huge. And they are just way behind in much of their maintenance. So it'd be kind of nice to dovetail that with their easement setting aside.
Mr. Johnson.
Again, Ms. Braga asked a question that leads to a follow-up thought. I look at Chugach State Park, and this is an example of one that feels like the sort of impact is almost entirely going to be felt, by Anchorage, right? A lot of these things, we look at them and sort of like, well, they're statewide, but, also has consequences for us. this is one standing out, not to say let's get in the weeds about the merits of this particular one, but I'm curious if there's anything else on the list that we're looking at where it's like, this is just totally an Anchorage issue. And if this and others are, then I mean, I suppose that perhaps that creates more of an impetus for us as a body to weigh in on that, because it's in our backyard, so to speak, maybe literally.
Yeah, that is a good point. And Mr. Cloud, I guess that since we're on that topic and since you guys had provided input, one question somebody else raised to me was, and again, we should read the bill, but does that allow for private easements, or is it really dealing with public easements? And that's a question that I think we need to have answered, but I don't know the answer to that. And if we don't have it now, you can come back later.
Yes, Madam Chair, it's a great question. I understood it to mean easements that the municipality could use, but I don't know more expansively what other kinds of easements would be allowed. I can get more information and report that one back to the committee, because that bill is a very Anchorage specific one.
Mr. Dunn.
As a follow-up, if you don't mind, when you're looking at this, Mr. Cloud, I think also a question that comes up is, we had the briefing last week about, wildfire mitigation efforts and where they put, fire breaks and things of that nature. And so the question I had is, like, when we put it on our side of the fence instead of the park, is that because it's the best place for it, or is that because it's the easiest place for it? So I don't know if there's some sort of connection between this easement proposal and also things like that, right? I mean, and so I'm asking, if we're allowing for easements in the state park, can that include things like a fire break or something of that nature, where perhaps we have the resources or the control over that at the municipality, but it falls within the boundaries of the park? I don't know, but I'm curious.
Through the chair to Member Johnson, I don't know the answer to that, but whether an easement could include some of those kinds of categories or not, I can look into that and see what the nexus might be between this easement issue and fire mitigation.
Okay, any other comments on the bills? Okay, not seeing any right now, but I think partly we wanted to just raise awareness that this list is out here, and it will continue to grow as they introduce bills probably every time they meet in floor session for a while. And also to say that if there are things that you would either like to talk about at a future committee, we can put them on the agenda, or you can just bring them to the committee, because things do move fast in Juneau. And or if you have questions or have just really want to understand the implications of a bill, I think just keep in contact, especially with Mr. Clauda, and we can also circulate to departments. And then just to note again, we know that the clerk's office has been tracking the elections related bills that would potentially impact us. And so we will continue to do that as well. Okay, well, lastly, I think we had one other topic, and it is directly related to our visit next week, but is really just, again, an open discussion, looking at state budget priorities and this says FY26 because we're looking at state fiscal year 26. So starting July 1st, 2025. So we're already looking at next year. So the budget, the governor's budget has been published in December. We did not go through and look at that in detail. There will be a revised budget, I believe, published in February. Kind of there's the first draft, second draft. That's what actually moves through the legislature. And so right now we don't have specific budget items to talk about other than what is in our legislative program. But I'll turn again to Mr. Clauda, see if there's any initial comments on that. And then if we want to express kind of priorities in the budget, we mentioned maintenance of state park, wildfire. If there's other things, and of course, a lot of these things like education funding, defined benefits have a big price tag attached to them. And so just seeing what members would like to put on the table as ideas or priorities. And so I'll turn to Mr. Clauda just to speak to where the mayor's office is coming from.
Sure. Yeah, we of course we've heard the guidance that it's a very tight revenue year, and so we know that it's going to be a big discussion. Any kind of new spending is going to be is going to be limited, right? So we're mindful of that. But a lot of our top priorities that are in our legislative program are fairly expensive items, right? So things like defined benefit pensions, or our energy priorities, which are large capital budget items primarily. Increasing the base student allocation in education, And then when we get into the muni specific requests, our capital projects list, and is something we'll watch closely. And then any discussion about, we don't have a firm ask related to the port on the table, but I think that it's obviously a huge project and a huge need, and that ultimately we do want state funding to go into that, whether it's this session or future sessions or when the opportunity is ripe. I think it's something that we have to be fairly assertive about as far as what a high priority for us is. So I think that it's stuff that we're watching closely. I think that we're mindful of the kind of revenue constraints, but still I think there are interesting windows of possibility. And also if there's an opportunity for a general obligation bond, which is something that gets discussed, that's something that we would be wanting to be looking at very closely, what opportunities there are for our priorities.
Yeah, thank you. And since you brought it up, general obligation bond, that would be something that is passed by voters at the state level. And it doesn't work quite the same way as our bonding because there is no state broad-based tax. And so the funding mechanism is different, but there has been pretty much since this past year, I think, a lot of discussion about, what do we do one of those? What goes on it? What is the focus? And so so I would anticipate that's an active discussion. And beyond that, I'll just note as well, we have our district priorities. Many of those are very local level projects. And so again, we are not, this process and what the municipality as a whole does not preclude individual members from speaking to your legislators about those priorities. Because I think the capital budget will not be large, but it is probably going to be more than zero. So so there's an opportunity to at least try to get our stuff in there. And then, of course, whether it survives the governor's veto is another question. That is something we are actively aware of and mindful of as well. So I don't know if there's any other kind of budget priorities or things, Ms. Branca?
So I know that the housing, our situation with attainable housing, I'd heard that we were giving an ask to the legislature to help us with that in some way. Is that maybe the SB 14, the AIDA finance workforce housing development, or municipal comprehensive housing plans? Are one of those meant to increase housing in Anchorage specifically? Do you know?
Do you want to go to speak about Mr. Clotta?
Yes, through the chair to member Branca. The one that the SB 50 that's for comprehensive plans for housing. I'm not familiar with the details of that by Senator Dunbar, but Senator Dunbar is a very strong advocate for housing and for Anchorage. So I need to educate myself on that. But the other one, SB 14, which is AIDA finance workforce housing, that one is essentially Alaska Industrial Development Export Authority, AIDA, has a program that does loan guarantees or loan participation. They partner with a bank to put more money into a loan, and they basically have like 90% of the loan, and it allows for longer duration loans than what a bank would do on their own. That program is currently not used for housing. It's typically a commercial product, and Senator Dunbar's bill would allow that to be used to finance multifamily developments. So it would be a form of financing that a developer would not typically be able to get from a bank that would allow for a longer term. And it makes for a better kind of pro forma for the development as a whole.
I had one more.
Yeah, go ahead, Ms. Branca.
So I don't see this on the pre-filed, and I don't know what happened with them, but I was looking at House Bill 164 that Ashley Carrick had brought forward last year about safe storage of firearms. And then Andy Josephson had HB 162, which was extreme risk law for like a red flag law. If you feel like a family member is in a mental health crisis, then they should not have a firearm in their midst. And both of these seem pretty important. I've been working on safe storage here in Anchorage, which we cannot do because of what the state has in place. And so I'd be interested if anything is going forward to help not take away people's guns, but make them be more safely stored, or a way to keep them out of the hands of people who should not have them.
Yeah, I can offer some comments there. I think in general, I think it is common for sponsors to bring back bills again,
Okay.
you know, so even if they weren't pre-filed, I can't speak for those individual sponsors or those bills, but I think that's a great question to ask their staff and say, you know, I'd love, especially if you support it, to say, hey, I'd love to see that happen. And there may be more discussion where they intend to bring it back in a different way, or, you know, there's some other way to do that. So I would say in general, contact the sponsors, even if you haven't seen one of those bills yet, because we are still early in session. And then the other thing, this is a good follow-up. We will make sure, generally speaking, there's a legislative contact list where it's got their emails, their staff members, and their phone numbers. And so I'll make sure that gets circulated to all members, just so we have it, because again, it's easier than trying to navigate their website. But yeah, I think in general, if there's something that you're aware of in the past that somebody's been a champion of, just talk to them again, because it's likely that they're still in favor of it. But I don't have any other information on that particular topic, or yeah, I'm seeing a head shake. Okay, any other comments on that? I don't see any. I think we're all aware that it's going to be a difficult budget math problem for them to solve. So, so we are not walking in thinking we're getting everything that we ask for, but it's worth a try. I guess one other thing I'll note very briefly on SB 50, I actually met with Senator Dunbar and suggested this back in the summer. It's a very simple bill. This is the housing comprehensive plans. What I'm trying to figure out is even if that statute applies to us as a home rule municipality. But I think arguably we talk about housing a fair amount in our plans. So there's that, but it essentially adds housing to the list of required topics that you need in a comprehensive plan, including land use, transportation, public facilities. There's a short list in the statute itself. And the intent behind this, at least my understanding of the intent, is to really trigger communities to update their comprehensive plans, whether it's adding a chapter, whether it's maybe they need a plan update. There are some plans that already do talk extensively about housing that would probably be compliant with this. But knowing this is a statewide issue, it's meant to really spur that conversation. And I'll also say I've been in a couple discussions with folks who are interested in getting at that from the other side and trying to provide mini grants or provide funding to municipalities for updating those plans. And again, I'll say probably that would be smaller communities that, you know, have a really limited capacity, probably don't have a full-time planner. And so I don't see necessarily that we would be a recipient of those funds if that does come to pass, but that's maybe the other side of the coin. When you require cities to do something, it's helpful if you help pay for it. So, but yeah, I would expect that housing continues to be a priority, and I know I'll be personally advocating for those things, and we'll see what else comes back. Ms. Branca?
I'm sorry, I'm a little chatty Hattie today. I had the pleasure to meet Mr. McCabe at the railroad party, and he was telling me all about how the port tariffs were unfair and how he's getting a port authority and how they're going to build their own port. And I'm wondering, are we making any official statement on this HB 7 that establishes port authority for Anchorage and Matsu, requires Port of Alaska and MSB land? So I'm not sure what all he's planning there, but you did mention they wanted their own port, and so.
Yeah, I think that's not new information. I'm going to kick that one right over to Nolan.
I was a little late to the party, I think.
Sure. Through the chair to Member Braga, that bill, I don't know that we're going to be speaking out specifically on that bill. This is a bill introduced by a member of the minority. We're not sure this one's going to really go anywhere, but I think that it really behooves us, collectively as the municipality, both branches really to carry the right messaging on the port, in general when we speak about it. And I think a lot of the talking points that maybe that this legislator has been bringing forth are, that probably about the surcharges to do with goods, that I think it's important to keep those in perspective. I think sometimes the magnitude of those get really exaggerated, how much we're actually charging, and also the underlying necessity for doing it, right? It's a very straightforward purpose that we've laid out, I think, really well in the plan of finance that that the body has had a chance to at least get briefed on, and so I think that we have a lot of messaging to do around the port to make sure that folks understand, one, that the magnitude of the surcharges aren't nearly as dramatic as sometimes gets reported, and two, why we're doing it, and three, if we want to reduce the surcharges and what gets passed on to consumers, that the best way to do that is to provide other kinds of funding for the port, state sources, federal sources. And so that's the messaging that we really try to carry forward. I think, and it's going to be a big theme of the trip to Juneau next week is talking about the port and talking about the plan for the overall port modernization, the progress that we've made, the effective use we've made of past state funds, and so forth. But I think in general, though, we do have the bill. To me itself, the bill moving forward, I don't view as a huge threat. What I do view, though, is that some of the misconceptions about our port and our management of it that are behind that type of legislation that we want to get a handle on.
Mr. Constant?
Yeah, I don't know that the misinformation is behind those efforts, but it's certainly being utilized by those who are propounding those efforts. And many of you might remember over late in the year, there was a subsidiary of one of our main operators who sent out a press release that essentially stated that because of their cost increases, they're going to have to increase their tariff. And then at the bottom of it said, and the Port of Alaska is increasing our tariff, which made it look like we're the reason they're raising their rates, which was an absolute bastardization of facts. And because what we were doing was a tiny, tiny, tiny little paper thin sliver. It was all of the other suppliers that raised their rates. This was just their cost of doing business. Of course, we got the blame. I think I agree with the strategy of not giving any air to the proposed bill because it is unworthy of our time or anyone's time. And I do think that there was an effort last session by a Senate Democrat from the West to have this conversation. So we should be doing some outreach along those lines. But yeah, this bill isn't worth the paper it's written on.
Yeah, thanks. And I'll just briefly add to last week in the enterprise and utility infrastructure, whatever the acronym is now, I asked for what is a rough valuation of the port? Because I think that if, and I agree that we do not give that time, but I think we do need to understand the value of that asset. And we need to add to that the construction costs of fixing that asset or getting it up to snuff. So I think that way we're just ready for if we need that information in a conversation. But I think I did not see any kind of discussion of how that would get paid for by the state or if we're being compensated for the taking of that asset. So those are just things to keep on the back burner for now. Okay, any other comments, questions, items to bring up? Not seeing any. Anyone for audience participation? Seeing a no. So I think with that, so I'll just mention briefly, we are meeting monthly. This meeting was moved to better align with the start of session, but generally we're going to be meeting the second Thursday. Tried to find a time that aligns with other committee meetings so we don't have to bring folks down here for no reason. And so you'll just see those listed below. And again, if you have things you want to bring to us, please just reach out and we get them on the agenda or work on resolutions if you'd like to move forward a position on something. And with that, we will be adjourned. Thank you.